Our next speaker this afternoon is Dr. Terry Mesmer. Terry is a professor and Extension Wildlife Specialist, Associate Director for Extension and Outreach at the Jack H. Berryman Institute, Department of Wildland Resources at Utah State University. He and his associates, graduate students, and technicians conduct research and extension programs that engage communities, elected officials, public and private agency administrators, managers, and biologists. They work cooperatively with these partners to learn more about natural resource systems as they manage them. They take great pride in knowing that their knowledge generated by research and information disseminated through extension programming is used to make management decisions. Their efforts, in addition to providing better information to decision makers, have renewed stakeholder appreciation for the role of science in management. The community-based partnerships they facilitate are changing the way Utah citizens view conservation. The impact of their efforts was recently recognized at the 23rd Annual Utah Rural Summit when they received the 2010 Rural Utah Award. Terry Mesmer.
Thank you. No symposium would be complete without talking about sage-grouse, right? Okay. And so we're going to talk about sage-grouse health. And I talked to Darren about putting this together. I thought about this a lot. I really have. And actually, I got up last night about 4 o'clock, and I did change my presentation again, and then I changed it again after I heard from up this morning. So this is a process in evolution. So let's talk about health. What is health? What is health? What's health? Do I look like a healthy guy? Yeah, right. Actually, I broke my toe about 2 weeks ago, and it hurts, really hurts, and so I'm not quite sure I'm healthy. But health is different things. Usually, it's a sense of well-being. It's feeling good. It's feeling enriched. It's benefiting from what you're doing, and it allows you to do other things in your life. And so, yeah, I guess I'm a healthy guy. I'm not as young as I used to be, but I'm still healthy. Is war healthy then? Is war healthy? Is war healthy? Let's think about it. What happens when more people get killed, right? Property gets damaged, lives get disrupted, but we also have a lot of neat technological advances, right? Penicillin. Things along the line. So is war healthy? Well, I would vote not. So if it isn't, then why the heck do we continue to do it? Why do we continue to engage in activities which disrupt or impact the health? Which logically maybe aren't the best things we need to be involved in. Whoa, let me back up, sorry. Is conflict healthy? It's interesting, the last couple presentations, if there's wolves there, they show up again. So we have wolves on our minds. So is conflict ever healthy? Do we see conflict? Do we avoid conflict? What are some of the things important in terms of our own life? I mean, my life, I like things to be on a nice even keel, and I like predictability. And sometimes when conflict happens, it causes stress. And is stress healthy? Well, if it makes your blood pressure go up, you have a heart attack, it's probably not healthy, right? How about humor? Is humor about conflict healthy? Here we have a Gary Larson. It's called liposmithrophobia. The fear of being pursued by timber wolves around the kitchen table while wearing socks on a newly waxed floor. Okay. Is that healthy? Well, everybody's laughing. Humor is healthy. Humor is a release. It's a release of stress. Now let's talk about a bigger picture when we talk about landscape health. And this is the landscape health we're talking about in the West. And what I've identified here are some of the floristic regions and the sages by, and this map comes to us from SageMap. What we have are a lot of unique vegetation types, mosaic of public and private ownership, and we also have communities. The health of communities that revolve around us. And a healthy community is a vibrant community. It has jobs, it has schools, it has people paying their taxes, it is prosperity. Then we talk about ecosystem health and some of the animals associated with them. This is a slide I borrowed from, I believe it was Dr. Howe, a presentation he gave several years ago. So ecosystem, what is the ecosystem? When we talk about the West, one of the things when we talk about sage-grouse is sagebrush steppe or sagebrush. I've heard that sagebrush ecosystem, sagebrush steppe is one of the most endangered ecosystems in North America. We also talk about community health, and how does this fit into the picture? Activity going on, vibrant main streets, commerce, money to generate good things for good people, right? And then we have global health. And here's some of the fallout we talk about global health, particularly from the standpoint of climate change. And so as you can see, health means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So what's a wrench got to do with it? What's a rusty wrench got to do with it? This rusty wrench is particularly important to me. Back when growing up on a farm in southwestern North Dakota, a small family farm, I was the second of three brothers. And coming from a German background, typically what happens in that situation is the oldest brother gets the farm, which he did. But I wanted to get involved in farming or something to do with natural resources and the land. And so I looked around and I thought this profession of wildlife biology would be a pretty good thing to do. For one, I would be able to work on the farm or the land and grow a crop. But the other most important thing about it is I would get a steady paycheck no matter what I produced. And that's important, right? One particular day working for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in Devils Lake, North Dakota, I was up in Cavalier County spraying leafy spurs. And I had this real fancy Fish and Wildlife Service truck, and I drove up to this one farm after I had run out of water in my sprayer. I was going to go to his windmill and fill my sprayer with water. So I drove up to the yard, and I parked in front of his windmill. I proceeded to get out. All of a sudden, I had a sharp pain on my foot. And I looked up, and there was a landlord, a farmer, who had been working on a farm implement. He was standing in front of me waving that wrench. And it was that big. It was that big. And he proceeded to tell me, quote unquote, what a chicken shit outfit I worked for. And so about 30 minutes went on, and I don't know if it was the tears or whatever that was running down my face, but he finally let up on the door. And he proceeded to understand a little bit about what I was trying to do and my background and such. But to me, it was a real paradigm shift. It was a real rusty wrench. It was something that I had always thought that wildlife was loved by everybody. Going up in southwestern North Dakota, the most important thing the most important person out there, the person that had the highest prestige, actually was the conservation officer. Everybody liked him. Everybody bought him beers at the local bar and stuff like that. And so he was very well respected. And so I thought everybody liked wildlife. Well, obviously my paradigm shifted. So what's your rusty wrench? What are some of the rusty wrenches that are out there? Well, change. Change. What's the first thing happens when we're faced with change? What's the first thing that you do when you're faced with change? Do you make excuses why you don't have to change? Yeah, we do. We do. I'd probably make 10 excuses a day why I didn't have to do this, that, or the other thing, right? Got a call from my wife. She said, we need to do this. I said, well, I'm busy right now. Okay? Maybe it's healthcare. Maybe it's the price of gas. How many now drive Priuses? Oh, nobody. Okay. How many drive Hummers? Okay? But basically, something causes you to change the way you see things, the way you see life, the way you see how you vision things, how you go about life. When landowners in North America or the United States were surveyed a few years ago about what was their number one important issue, the number one important issue that they were going to be concerned with in the next decade, you know what that issue was? What do you think was the thing they were most concerned about? Price of grain? Price of fuel? It was affordable health care. It was affordable health care. Okay. Also, climate change. This has changed. We've got certain expectations. We've got certain concerns, long-term concerns. Concerns that are tough to internalize. How does a manager right now plan for something that is going to gradually happen over 30 years' time? How do you put in place management actions that are going to be sufficient enough to accommodate and deal with change when it's tough to internalize that change when you can't see it up front? Okay? So what does that got to do with sage grouse? Sage grouse and vegetation. When we look at the dynamics of sage grouse populations, we've got a new context here. We saw two species there, the greater and the Gunnison sage grouse. Both are now candidate species. The focus shifts then from the individual or from the population to the individual. In other words, how do we manage to protect the individual? In the case of a candidate species, or in the case of a species that's threatened, the loss of one animal is considered a take. And so sage grouse hitting fence, or you're hitting a sage grouse with your car, may constitute take. And so the focus shifts from looking at the population to managing uncertainty. The states have done a lot of different things along this line. They've come up with the formation of their local working groups to bring stakeholders together to talk about this issue, to talk about and identify what the threats are, what the concerns are, and what are some of the things we need to focus on to address the issue of sage-grouse conservation. Also part of this are other sage-grouse obligates, and the focus of all of these species is sagebrush. You know, we've done a really, really good job of getting rid of sagebrush. In the 1950s, we had massive cost share programs out there to get rid of sagebrush. And we pretty much know how to kill sagebrush. You know, we can kill it a number of different ways. But the bottom line is that's the vegetation part of the equation. And so when we're looking at managing the sagebrush that we've got available in that vegetation, we have to take into account the entire history, the entire health of the ecosystem, the health of the landscape, the health of the community, and the health of the species. And there's trade-offs. There's trade-offs involved in it. In managing for grouse, sagebrush for sage-grouse, there may be trade-offs where you can actually affect and you can impact other species. Well, people manage. That's what we do. I wanted to be a wildlife manager, and part of wildlife manager's job is to manage things, to manipulate things, to do things, to change things around, and to focus on them. Well, Edward Leopold's perspective on management was simple. The same things you use to impact the vegetation, the habitat, you can use to manage the habitat for good, right? Well, wait a minute. This is a data slide that was put together by Lorian Belton in 2007-2008. Lorian surveyed all the local working groups on a range-wide basis, and she asked them some important questions. What are the serious threats to sage-grouse? And what we've got the breakdown here based on different states. We've got Colorado, Idaho, Montana, and you look at the different bar graphs here. The yellow is development, the blue is predators, the orange is wildfire, the black is energy development, and the green is overgrazing. And if you look at that chart, you see some differences based on the states, based on what the states perceive as being the greatest threats. And if you look at some of those particular areas, at the time of this survey, what was happening in Idaho at the time that we did this survey? It was burning up. A lot of wildfires. But then, if you take this conglomeration and you break it down into the individuals by specific interests, what do people think? People, by basically their backgrounds or demography, think what are the important issues, and you have some real interesting differences. Ranchers, landowners, agency personnel, government officials, environmental interests, and others. Elva Leopold says you need to use the cow, plow, axe, and fire to manage the habitat, to effect the change, to address the risk, to improve the habitat. But we have a lot of disagreement on what constitutes the actual risk or the actual threat. And so that's where people come in. I'm basically an introvert. Most wildlife biologists go into wildlife biology because they don't want to be around people. It's not necessarily they don't like them, but they would rather be out doing stuff in the outdoors. And so here we have a situation where we have all of these issues involving community health, involving vegetation management and manipulation, and we have professionals trained to manage these areas who really don't like people. You see the problem there? How many sociologists do we have in this room? Oh, how many ecologists? Biologists? Okay. And so you see where the dilemma comes in trying to integrate those resources, the human resources with the natural resources to focus on sage-grouse health. And so what we do is we've got processes that we put people together and we start talking about things and we start interacting and we start trying to understand where everybody's coming from. Okay? We also have an executive order that says you will work together on these issues, and this is an executive order that mandates the Department of Interior, Agriculture, Commerce, Defense, and Environmental Protection to come together to talk about these issues. We also have conferences. This is a conference that was held in 2005 on cooperative conservation. Cooperative conservation. Cooperative conservation. Part of this process in any of these things is the focus of bringing groups together is the idea that first of all you're going to come together. But part of the problem in putting these collaboratives together and these partnerships together is that no one has that important requisite right there. We're not quite sure who owns it, how we own it, and that's really the beauty of the North American wildlife management model. Is wildlife resources belong to whom in this country? The people. In the UK, they belong to the landowner who they happen to reside on at the time that they're shot. Okay? The impediments to ownership are out there. And one of the biggest ones here, in addition, we talked about property rights, the uncertainty, why should I become involved, but there's this whole issue of fear and trust. Fear and trust. Have you ever heard of the phrase, I'm the government and I'm here to help? Basically, most of us in this room probably fit in that category of being bureaucrats. Bureaucrats. And that's an important role. Being a bureaucrat is not bad, but making sure you recognize is an important part of the process. So when we talk about collaboration, it's a scary topic. Several years ago, I was in Montana at a workshop on Seeking Common Ground, sponsored by the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. The facilitator mentioned collaboration, and all of a sudden from the back of the room, this guy pounded on the desk, and it happened to be a rancher, and this rancher happened to be a veteran of World War II. And he happened to remember things in World War II where folks collaborated with the enemy, and good things or bad things happened to good people. And essentially, really, what this is really about is working with the enemy. It develops based on building trust and working together to address the change. Now, what's trust? And this isn't in this quote. Is trust a relative? When people are asked who they get their information from on surveys we've done throughout North America, and who they trust the most, they trust their relatives. How many in here are parents? Who do you trust the most with your children? Grandma, grandpa? A relative, right? Okay. In Lori's work, she went out and did some initial work looking more deep in this, and she looked at issues of overall trust. When she asked the state wildlife biologists out there who they trusted, here were the people they trusted relative to sage-grouse issue. Pretty cool, huh? University scientists show up on that list. When she asked the same question of the landowners, what do you think the landowner said? Unfortunately, university scientists didn't make the top 10. Didn't make the top 10. So we might want to redo that survey, I guess. Maybe there's some bias in that survey, right? Okay. When we ask them about getting information, and this is really the important part about when we talk about vegetation management, the cow plow action flyer on the landscape. Who do they want to get the information about? Who, meaning the landowners out there that own those landscapes and manage those landscapes and are big parts of it? They want to get it from you. They want to get it from you, from the person sitting in this room. Now, we have a real problem here if you don't like people, right? We have a real problem. If you can't communicate and you can't dialogue and you can't understand and you can't listen, then we have problems in communicating. I know a lot of us are going to web-based type stuff. When we ask these landowners about if they use the web, not very many people use the web. I'm sure they do. They use it for email and things along that line, but they're not using it a lot to get information. They need to get out on the ground. We asked them some other things what are important about looking at the issue of vegetation, sage-grouse, and management. What's one word you see popping up again in that slide? Monitoring. 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 With sage-grouse, one of the important things the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is going to ask for when they do a status review this fall are data. Our data. What things have been done on the landscape to make a difference, either in the vegetation to affect the population in a positive way and remove the threats? What are landowners interested in? Well, they'd like some support in the process. We've had a long-term program I talked about in the 1950s, 1960s. The Natural Resources Conservation Service spent a lot of money in the West doing what? Getting rid of sagebrush. They spend a lot of money in North Dakota, South Dakota, the Prairie Pothole region doing what? Draining wetlands. And so when you've got a long-term paradigm, a long-term focus to shift a large machinery in one direction to look at restoring those vegetation and habitat is something that's going to take a lot more work. The take-home message is, you can't do it yourself. You can't do it yourself in terms of the landscape. You have to look at integrating everyone in the landscape. And there's a lot of expertise out there that we need to tap into. The important part of this last statement, take-home message, is building those relationships. Building those relationships and becoming part of that particular community. To stepping out of your box in terms of that regulator, or that wildlife biologist, or that ecologist, and starting to learn a little bit more about the community that we live and we work in. And relationships are a really important part of this process in terms of looking if we're going to conserve sage-grouse. In summary, if you create that psychological ownership, if you bring people to the table and you share the ownership, you share the pain. Everybody feels pain. Everybody feels pain, right? My toe hurts right now. I feel pain. But thank goodness for ibuprofen. Okay? Understanding that and understanding everybody's part of that process are important in creating that ownership and bringing people to the table to make a positive decision, a positive vision. Mike Bodenchuk talked about creating that vision. What is that vision of the West? Well, that vision is going to be created by the people that live and work in these communities. And I don't know what that vision is right now, but that vision is a process. It's dynamic. It's a process in evolution. It involves adaptive management, where we go from the small to the large. Along that process, we need to be learning collectively together. And this is the fantastic quote. I don't know, does anyone know where this quote came from or who said this? I am continually amazed that people feel to see the things as clearly as I do. Anybody who said that? No, it wasn't Mike Bodenchuk, anonymous resident of planet Earth. So the question I leave you with is, are we truly prepared to integrate the resources at the landscape level? And when I talk about resources, I'm talking about the human capital with the biological capital to create that common vision. And the sooner we get on the business of doing that and preparing ourselves to do that, to engaging all the sciences, all the representation out there in this effort, I think the better off the West is going to be, and the future will be that much brighter. Subject to any questions. Thank you.
You have time for questions?
No, I'm not a sociologist. I'm a wildlife biologist. Yes.
I know this was a talk about sage grouse and sage brush finally, but we've had a lot of discussion about elk and aspen. So what sorts of suggestions might you have from successes of looking at sagebrush and sage-grouse to dealing with elk and aspen?
Actually, I've done some work on elk and aspen. Okay. The question Frank asked me was about this was about sage-grouse and sagebrush. In looking at the issue of elk and aspen, a lot of talks focus on that. What kind of recommendations or things do I have in that process? And actually, it's interesting because in Utah, that is really a bit not only elk and aspen, it's elk and alfalfa, elk in every place. And so the interesting part of the process, I think you have to go back to the baseline. You know, and part of this process, one of the things that is really my pet peeve about science and research is oftentimes, as a scientist, we do research in absentia. In other words, when we're going out and we're doing our research and we're trying to answer an important question, sometimes maybe the question we're trying to answer isn't really the most important question that the community needs answered. But also along the way in that process, whether it be elk and aspen, sage-grouse and sagebrush, or prairie dogs and grasslands, I think involving those communities and those community decision makers in that process of scientific discovery. You know, the best ambassadors for the work we've been doing with sage-grouse and the sage-grouse local working groups have been the graduate students that have been out interacting on a daily basis with local communities, sharing information, knowledge, but also asking questions about what's important in those communities. And so I think, I guess what I would say, Frank, is return to that baseline. Even though we've got good literature out there, good things published, sometimes the mere step of taking a step back and going back and replicating work that's maybe been done on a demonstration basis in a local community to focus on some of these issues might be more important in the long term. It's going to be a long-term haul. It's not a quick fix. Because you're dealing with different paradigms, you're dealing with different rusty wrenches. And, rusty wrenches pretty much changed the way I focused and how I went about my life. I was focused on wanting to be a refuge manager and sit on a refuge and watch the ducks fly and grass grow, and my life would have been perfect. But you can't do that, because ducks don't stay in the refuge. And invasive species, the sleepy birds, don't stay in the refuge either. Did I talk around that? Yes?
How do you recruit diversity to these local working groups?
It's tough. Because everyone has a perspective. They've got long-term perspective, long-term personalities involved, and sometimes you're just not going to get people showing up. But that doesn't mean you don't stop trying. You continue to go out, you continue to include people in the mailing list, you make the information that you're talking about, the meeting minutes, anything along that line, you make it readily available, you're transparent, so everybody has a vision for it. I know there's a lot of mistrust out there. There really is, and it's tough to get over. The other thing you can do is maybe just, I mentioned about trust being relative, you could maybe marry it or something. Anyway, that was tongue in cheek, I apologize.
Last question for Terry? Thank you very much.